The scanner chirped once, then went silent. The red light stayed on. "Step aside, sir." The words landed hard in the narrow boarding corridor, loud enough to cut through the low hum of rolling suitcases and murmured conversations. People turned. Shoes paused mid-step. A woman in a beige trench coat tightened her grip on her passport. A man behind her exhaled sharply, annoyed already, the way travelers do when they sense a delay that does not belong to them. Daniel Brooks did not move. He stood there with his boarding pass still in his hand, fingers steady, posture relaxed but rooted, like a man who had learned long ago that rushing never fixed anything. He was in his late 50s, tall but not imposing, dressed in a charcoal jacket that had seen better days, pressed slacks, brown leather shoes worn soft at the edges. No logos, no shine. The kind of clothes men buy once and keep for years. "I scanned already," Daniel said. His voice was calm, even, not defensive. "It went through." The security officer did not look at him. His name badge read Mark Ellison, mid-40s, crew cut, jaw clenched like he chewed it that way on purpose. He tapped the screen again, harder this time, as if force might change the answer. The light stayed red. "It didn't clear," Mark said. "You can't board." Behind them, the jet bridge breathed out a long mechanical sigh, metal ribs expanding, waiting. Flight attendants clustered near the aircraft door, watching without watching. The gate agent shifted her weight, eyes flicking between the clock and the growing knot of people. Daniel felt the temperature change. Not in the air, in the room. "Is there a problem with the system?" Daniel asked. "I checked in this morning. TSA cleared me." Mark finally looked up. His eyes traveled Daniel's body the way a hand might search a pocket. Quick, dismissive, already finished. "This lane is restricted," Mark said. "Priority only." Daniel raised the boarding pass slightly, just enough. "That's what this is." Mark took it, held it between two fingers like something damp. He studied it longer than necessary. The paper did not tremble. Daniel watched the man's throat move when he swallowed. A woman to the side, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, leaned closer to her husband. "He's holding everyone up," she whispered, not quietly. Her eyes slid over Daniel, then away, like she touched something unpleasant. Mark handed the pass back. "You need to go to the desk," he said. "They'll sort it out." "How long will that take?" Daniel asked. Mark's mouth tightened. "As long as it takes." There it was. Not a rule, not a reason, just a wall. Daniel stepped aside as instructed, the current of boarding flowing around him like water around a stone. He did not protest. He did not raise his voice. He stood near the glass, watching the last passengers disappear into the aircraft belly, their reflections stretched thin by the curved surface. Inside his chest, something old stirred. Not anger, not yet recognized. He had seen this look before, in conference rooms where his ideas were praised only after someone else repeated them. In banks, where the handshake lingered a second too long, searching for reassurance. In hospitals, when his mother was alive, and nurses spoke to him slowly, carefully, as if vocabulary were contagious. Mark leaned into his radio. "Gate 9 secured," he said. "One passenger delayed." Delayed, not denied. Language mattered. Daniel noticed that. The gate agent approached, smile tight, professional. "Sir, we'll rebook you if needed." "I don't need to be rebooked," Daniel said. "I need to board." She hesitated. "Security flagged your clearance." "On what basis?" She glanced at Mark, then back at Daniel. "I don't have that information." Of course you don't, Daniel thought. A man in a navy blazer stepped closer, irritation spilling over. "Are we done here?" he said. "Some of us have connections." Mark straightened. "Sir, please step back." The man rolled his eyes but complied. Daniel caught the flicker of apology there, buried under entitlement. It was almost enough to make him smile. Almost. Minutes passed. The aircraft door remained open. Somewhere inside, an engine whined, low and patient. Daniel checked his watch. Old habit. He was not worried about the time. He was measuring something else. Response. Pressure. Silence. Mark returned, posture different now, tighter, less certain. "You need to come with me," he said. "Where?" Daniel asked. "Secondary screening." Daniel nodded. "I'd like a supervisor present." Mark paused. A beat too long. "That's not necessary." "It is," Daniel said. Their eyes locked. Around them, the terminal seemed to lean in, hungry. A young man nearby raised his phone, then thought better of it, sliding it back into his pocket. An older woman crossed herself without knowing why. Mark exhaled through his nose. He touched his radio again. "Supervisor to gate 9. They waited. In the silence, Daniel felt the weight of his pocket. The phone. He had not touched it yet. He wouldn't. Not now. Not until the room finished showing him who it wanted to be. When the supervisor arrived, she was younger than Mark, late 30s, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp. Her name was Laura Perez. She listened as Mark spoke, nodding, face unreadable. She turned to Daniel. "Sir, we're seeing an irregularity connected to your reservation." "What kind?" "An administrative hold." Daniel tilted his head. "Placed by whom?" Laura hesitated. "I don't have that detail." Daniel breathed in slowly. He smelled jet fuel, coffee, the faint citrus of cleaning spray. His pulse stayed even. "I am scheduled on this flight," he said. "You are preventing me from boarding without explanation. That is not an irregularity. That is a decision." Laura studied him now, really looked. The lines at his eyes, the way he stood, balanced, unafraid. Something shifted behind her expression. "I'm going to make a call," she said. "Please do," Daniel replied. She stepped away. Mark stayed where he was, arms crossed, jaw grinding. "You could make this easier," he muttered. Daniel met his gaze. "So could you." The loudspeaker crackled. "Final call for Flight 278 to Atlanta. Final call." The words echoed, sharp. Laura returned. Her face had lost cover. "Sir," she said carefully, "we need to pause boarding." The gate agent's head snapped up. "What?" Laura didn't look at her. "Pause boarding. Now." The aircraft door began to close, then stopped. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Confusion, annoyance, a low edge of fear. Daniel felt it, Ben. The pull, the turn. Whatever had been hidden was moving now, dragging weight behind it. "Who did you call?" Daniel asked. Laura swallowed. "The airport director is on his way." Mark stiffened. "Why?" Laura did not answer him. She looked at Daniel again, eyes searching, something like respect beginning to form, slow and reluctant. "Sir," she said, voice quieter now, "may I ask what you do for a living?" Daniel considered the question. The moment hung, delicate as glass. "Today," he said, "I'm trying to get home." The airport director arrived without running, which somehow made it worse. Thomas Hargreave moved through the terminal with the calm, deliberate stride of a man used to crises, the kind that did not raise his voice, because others always lowered theirs first. Early 60s, silver hair combed back, navy suit immaculate, tie straight. He carried authority the way some men carried weather, an invisible pressure that bent rooms around him. Two assistants followed half a step behind, tablets clutched tight, eyes flicking everywhere at once. The boarding door was still open. The jet bridge lights glowed a sterile white. The passengers stood frozen in that awkward in-between state, coats half on, bags half lifted, unsure whether to complain or pretend none of this concerned them. Hargreaves stopped at the gate. He took in the scene in a single sweep. The paused aircraft, the security officers, the supervisor with tension in her shoulders. And finally, Daniel Brooks, standing near the glass, hands loose at his sides, face unreadable. "What's going on?" Hargreaves said. It was not a question. Laura Perez spoke first. "Sir, we flagged an administrative hold tied to Mr. Brooks's reservation." Hargreaves turned to Mark Ellison. "Did you initiate that?" Mark's jaw flexed. "The system did." "That wasn't what I asked," Hargreaves said. Mark hesitated. The terminal seemed to hold its breath with him. "I followed procedure," he said finally. Hargreaves' eyes narrowed. He looked back at Laura. "Who placed the hold?" Laura swallowed. "It originated from a vendor-level access, security services." A flicker of irritation crossed Hargreaves' face, gone as quickly as it came. "So someone with limited authority decided to override a boarding clearance." Mark opened his mouth. Hargreaves raised a hand. Silence snapped shut. Hargreaves turned toward Daniel. Up close, he studied him more carefully. The creases around the eyes that came from years of watching rooms instead of talking in them. The stillness that suggested discipline, not fear. Hargreaves felt an uncomfortable sensation then. Recognition without memory. "Mr. Brooks," Hargreaves said, "I apologize for the inconvenience. We'll resolve this." Daniel nodded once. "I appreciate that." The simplicity of the response unsettled Mark more than anger would have. Hargreaves gestured to one of his assistants. "Pause the boarding clock. Notify the captain." The assistant hesitated. "Sir, we're already close to delay penalties." Hargreaves' voice hardened. "Do it." The assistant moved. Around them, the murmur grew louder. A retired couple whispered sharply about missed connections. A businessman muttered into his phone about incompetence. Someone laughed, brittle and nervous. Hargreaves leaned slightly closer to Daniel. "May I ask why you didn't escalate earlier?" Daniel's gaze never left his. "I wanted to see how far it would go." Hargreaves studied him for a long moment. Then, almost against his will, he nodded. "That answers a different question." Behind them, Mark shifted his weight. Sweat dotted his hairline now. "Sir," he said, "this man refused secondary screening." Daniel turned his head slowly. "That is not accurate." Hargreaves did not look at Mark. "Explain." Mark swallowed. "He questioned the process." "So he spoke," Hargreaves said. "That is not refusal." Mark's face reddened. "We have to maintain control." Hargreaves turned fully toward him now. The temperature dropped. Control is not the same as authority, and authority without judgment is just noise. Mark stiffened. "Sir, with respect, you won't hear when—" "I am here now," Hargreaves said, "and you will stop talking." The words landed like a verdict. Hargreaves turned back to Daniel. "You mentioned an administrative hold. Did anyone explain the basis for it?" "No," Daniel said. "They just told me I could not board." Hargreaves exhaled slowly. He glanced at Laura. "Pull the record. Full chain." Laura's fingers moved fast on her tablet. Her eyes widened slightly as she read. She looked up. "Sir, this hold references a compliance review." Hargreaves' brow furrowed. "Compliance with what?" Laura hesitated. "Port operations. Vendor oversight." Hargreaves felt the second flicker then. This one sharper. "Which vendor?" Laura turned the screen so only he could see. her lips pressed together. Hargreaves stared at the name. His jaw tightened. Behind them, Daniel watched the shift ripple through the director's posture. He had seen it before. That moment when a man realized a private problem had a public spine. "Clear the hold," Hargreaves said. Laura blinked. "Sir, it requires authorization from—" "I am authorizing it," Hargreaves said. "Now." The tablet chimed. Green replaced red. The scanner at the gate blinked. Mark's eyes widened. "Sir, you can't just—" Hargreaves rounded on him. "You are relieved from this post, effective immediately." The words sucked the air from the space. Mark stared. "For what?" "For poor judgment," Hargreaves said, "and for confusing procedure with prejudice." "I didn't—" "Enough!" Mark's shoulders sagged. He looked suddenly smaller, his uniform too stiff for his frame. Hargreaves turned to Daniel again. "You are cleared to board." Daniel did not move. A ripple went through the crowd, confusion layered with surprise. "I will board," Daniel said. "But not yet." Hargreaves' eyes sharpened. "Why?" "Because the reason this happened is bigger than me," Daniel said. "And if you let it end here, it will happen again. Just quieter." Hargreaves held his gaze. Around them, phones stayed down, but attention was absolute. Even the jet seemed to wait. "What are you asking for?" Hargreaves said. "A record," Daniel said. "Not an apology. A record. I want the hold documented, the override logged, the names attached, and I want the vendor compliance review that triggered this explained, publicly." Hargreaves felt the weight of the request. This was not a passenger seeking comfort. This was a man opening a door. "You understand what that implies?" Hargreaves said. Daniel nodded. "I do." Hargreaves glanced toward the glass, where the runway stretched out in long grey lines. He thought of meetings buried, of warnings softened, of contracts renewed because it was easier than fighting them. He looked back at Daniel. "You're not doing this for a refund." "No," Daniel said. "I'm doing it because the system only changes when it is embarrassed." A low murmur passed through the waiting passengers. Someone exhaled a quiet, "Good." Hargreaves straightened. "All right," he said. "We'll convene a formal review." Mark looked up sharply. "Sir." Hargreaves did not look at him. "Security will escort you to HR." Mark's mouth opened, then closed. Two officers stepped in, gentle but firm. As they led him away, Mark glanced back at Daniel. There was fear there now, and something else, a dawning understanding that this was never about a boarding pass. Hargreaves turned back to Daniel. "You still haven't told me why the compliance flag exists." Daniel reached into his jacket then, slow enough to be non-threatening. He did not pull out his phone. He pulled out a thin folder, worn at the edges. He handed it to Hargreaves. "Because 3 months ago," Daniel said, "my company suspended a port contract over irregular cargo movement, and someone decided to see how much power they had left." Hargreaves opened the folder. He scanned the first page, then the second. His expression hardened. The jet bridge lights hummed. The plane waited. And somewhere, beneath the controlled calm of the terminal, something old and dangerous began to shift. The file room smelled like dust and cold air, the kind of place meant to preserve paper long after people forgot why it mattered. Thomas Hargreaves stood at the head of the narrow conference table, jacket unbuttoned now, tie loosened a fraction. The folder Daniel had handed him lay open, its contents spread like a quiet accusation. Vendor logs, port manifests, redacted emails that were not redacted enough. Dates written out in full, deliberate, patient. Daniel sat across from him, hands folded, posture unchanged. The calm had not left him. If anything, it had sharpened. "These documents," Hargreaves said slowly, "were never escalated to my office." Daniel's eyes did not flicker. "I know." Laura Perez stood near the wall, arms crossed, reading over one shoulder. Her face had gone pale. "This isn't just a compliance issue," she said. "These are access reroutes, after-hours clearances. Someone used the VIP lane as cover." Hargreaves closed his eyes for a brief second, just long enough to curse himself. He had signed off on too many renewals, trusted too many middle layers because the system had always worked well enough. "How long," he asked, "have you known?" Daniel inhaled, slow, controlled. Long enough to be certain it wasn't an accident. Not long enough to stop it quietly. Hargreaves looked up, quietly. Daniel nodded. Quiet fixes protect the people who caused the problem. Loud ones protect everyone else. Outside the room, voices rose and fell. Passengers arguing with gate agents, phones ringing, the normal chaos of an airport. But in here, the air felt sealed. Laura shifted her weight. "Sir," she said to Hargreaves, "the vendor tied to this override also handles night security staffing." Hargreaves' jaw tightened. "Of course they do." He turned back to Daniel. "You knew this hold would trigger escalation." "Yes." "And you let yourself be stopped anyway." "Yes." Hargreaves studied him with something close to awe now, mixed with discomfort. "You could have called me directly." Daniel met his gaze. "Then you could have fixed it privately, and nothing would change." The words landed heavy. Hargreaves felt the truth of them settle in his chest like a stone. Laura broke the silence. "The flight is still holding," she said. "Captain's asking for a decision." Daniel stood then, not abruptly, not dramatically. He simply rose, tall and steady, the way men do when they are done asking. "I'll board," he said. "But this doesn't end when the door closes." Hargreaves nodded. "No," he said. "It doesn't." They walked back through the terminal together. The crowd parted instinctively. People sensed the shift, even if they didn't understand it. The man who had been delayed now moved with the airport director at his side. Not escorted, not restrained. Accompanied. At the gate, the scanner waited. Laura stepped aside. The green light blinked once, steady and sure. Daniel paused before stepping forward. He turned to Hargreaves. "You should know," he said quietly. "This review will cost you allies." Hargreaves' mouth curved into a thin smile. "I'm too old to confuse allies with liabilities." Daniel inclined his head. "Then you're the right man for the moment." Inside the aircraft, the cabin hummed with restrained curiosity. Heads turned. Whispers followed him down the aisle. A flight attendant straightened, eyes wide, then softened when Daniel met her gaze with a small nod. He took his seat. Window. Always window. The city lights pressed against the glass like scattered constellations. As the door finally closed and the plane pushed back from the gate, Daniel exhaled for the first time since the scanner had turned red. The tension did not leave him. It rearranged itself. Waiting. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. Unknown number. He let it ring twice before answering. "Yes," he said. "Mr. Brooks," a voice said. Male, older, southern cadence polished by boardrooms. "This is Raymond Klein, vendor oversight." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I was wondering how long it would take." "You caused a disruption today," Klein said. "People noticed." "That was the point." A pause. "You're forcing a confrontation." No, Daniel said. I'm forcing daylight. Klein exhaled. You don't understand the scope of what you're touching. Daniel opened his eyes. The runway lights blurred, streaking into motion as the plane accelerated. I understand exactly, he said. That's why I waited until you moved first. Silence stretched. Then, softer. What do you want? Daniel's voice did not rise. A full audit, independent, federal oversight if necessary, and everyone involved removed pending review. That would cripple operations. For a while, Daniel said. So does rot if you ignore it. Another pause, longer this time. Daniel imagined Klein in some quiet office, weighing options that had felt safe until this morning. You're betting a lot, Klein said. Daniel smiled faintly. I already placed the bet. Today just showed you the stakes. The line went dead. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket as the plane lifted, the ground falling away in a slow, powerful arc. The city shrank beneath him. The airport became a pattern of lights and lines. From up here, systems looked clean, orderly, deceptively simple. He knew better. Somewhere below, files were being pulled, calls were being made. Men who had lived comfortably in the margins were starting to feel the walls move. Daniel leaned back as the seatbelt sign chimed off. He stared out into the dark, not satisfied, not triumphant. Focused. This had never been about boarding a plane. It was about what happened when the wrong man was stopped in the wrong place and decided not to let it go. Morning came softly, filtered through a thin layer of cloud, the kind of grey light that made everything look honest, whether it wanted to be or not. Daniel Brooks woke before the plane touched down. He had not really slept. He rarely did when the world started to tilt. Atlanta greeted him with wet air and the low rumble of engines rolling into position. The cabin doors opened. The smell of jet fuel mixed with coffee and something sweet from the terminal bakery. Daniel stepped out without hurry, carrying only a leather briefcase, worn smooth by decades of travel. No entourage, no greeting committee. Just a driver waiting beyond security, nodding once in recognition, saying nothing. By mid-morning, Daniel sat alone in a small office overlooking Peachtree Street. The building was unremarkable from the outside. Inside, it was quiet in a way that suggested discipline. No art on the walls, no awards, just glass, wood, and light. The kind of place built by someone who did not need to prove anything. His phone lay face down on the desk. He watched it like a chess player watches the board after a risky move. It rang. Daniel did not flip it over. Yes, he said. Daniel. Thomas Hargreaves' voice came through, lower than before. Tired. We've got a problem. Daniel leaned back in his chair. Outside, a bus hissed to a stop, air brakes sighing like an animal at rest. That's not new. They're pushing back, Hargreaves said. Harder than I expected. Who's they? Daniel asked, though he already knew. The vendor consortium, oversight committee, legal. They're calling it an operational misunderstanding. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Of course they are. They're offering a settlement, Hargreave continued. Quiet review, internal corrections, no press. Daniel opened his eyes. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt. And what do you think? I think, Hargreave said carefully, that someone is scared. Daniel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Fear tells the truth faster than loyalty. There was a pause. Hargreave cleared his throat. There's something else. Daniel waited. Mark Ellison, Hargreave said. He's retaining counsel. He claims he was following directives, that he was instructed to flag certain profiles. Daniel's fingers tightened on the armrest. Profiles. Yes. Written? Not officially. Then it didn't happen, Daniel said, until it did. Another pause. You should know, Hargreave added. This is going to land on Capitol Hill if it keeps going. Daniel exhaled slowly. He stood and walked to the window. Below, people moved through the city in small, determined lines, lives intersecting without touching. Then it belongs there. After the call ended, Daniel remained standing. He thought of his father, who had taught him to shake hands firmly but never grip, to speak clearly, to keep records. Always keep records. His phone buzzed again. A different number this time. Daniel Brooks, he answered. Mr. Brooks, a woman said. Her voice was controlled, practiced. This is Senator Elaine Porter's office. Daniel's gaze sharpened. How can I help you? She'd like to speak with you. Today, if possible. Daniel glanced at his calendar. Empty by design. Where? Your office, if that's acceptable. Daniel smiled faintly. I prefer it. 2 hours later, Elaine Porter sat across from him, hands folded, posture immaculate. Late 60s, silver hair cut short, eyes that missed nothing. She had survived 4 decades in Washington by knowing when to smile and when not to. I won't insult you by pretending this is about a single airport, she said. Daniel appreciated that. Then we're starting honestly. You triggered an exposure, she said. One people have worked very hard to avoid. Daniel tilted his head. People or systems? She smiled thinly. Those words stop being different at a certain level. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You're here to ask me to stop. I'm here to ask you what you want, she corrected. Daniel did not answer right away. He studied her face. The fine lines, the control, the fatigue beneath it. Transparency, he said finally, and accountability. For whom? For anyone who thought inconvenience was a shield. Elaine exhaled through her nose. That's a wide net. Good. She leaned back. You understand this will cost you contracts? Yes. Friends. Daniel shrugged. I don't collect those. Protection, she said quietly. Daniel's eyes flicked up. From whom? She held his gaze. From consequences. Daniel stood. The movement shifted the room. He walked to a cabinet and removed a slim binder. He placed it on the desk between them, did not open it. This is only a fraction, he said. Ports, lanes, night staffing, cargo reclassification. You already know that. Elaine did not reach for it. You're forcing my hand. No, Daniel said. I'm showing it to you. Silence stretched. Outside, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. Elaine stood as well. If you do this, she said, it won't be reversible. Daniel nodded. Neither is rot. She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she extended her hand. Daniel shook it. Firm, brief. We'll be in touch, she said. After she left, the office felt larger, quieter. Daniel sat back down, suddenly aware of the weight in his chest. Not doubt, responsibility. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Laura Perez. They reassigned me, she said without preamble. To where? Internal audit, she replied. A pause. Thank you. Daniel smiled softly. You did your job. Another pause. They're not happy. They won't be, Daniel said. Not yet. When the call ended, Daniel finally allowed himself a moment. He leaned back, closed his eyes, counted his breath. Somewhere far away, men were scrambling. Documents were being shredded and reassembled. Calls were being returned faster than they ever had been before. And somewhere closer, quieter, a line had been crossed. Daniel opened his eyes. The story was no longer about an airport, or a flight, or a man told he could not board. It was about what happened next, when the system realized the man it tried to stop had nowhere left to go but forward. The first subpoena landed on a Friday afternoon, quiet enough to slip past the news cycle if you weren't watching for it. Daniel Brooks was watching. He read it, standing at his kitchen counter, jacket still on, city noise drifting in through an open window. The paper was heavy, formal, the language precise. Federal oversight, preliminary inquiry, compelled disclosure. It was not an accusation. Not yet. It was a door being pushed open by someone who wanted to see who would rush to close it. Daniel set the document down carefully, smoothing the edge with his thumb. His reflection in the darkened window looked older now. Not tired, focused. This was the stage where stories stopped being personal and started becoming expensive. His phone rang before he could turn away. "Daniel," Thomas Hargreave said, breath tight. "They moved faster than I thought." "Because they underestimated the paper trail," Daniel replied. "People who rely on silence forget how loud documents are." "They're framing it as isolated misconduct," Hargreave said. "Ellison, a few night supervisors. They want to contain it." Daniel walked into his study, the room dim, shelves lined with binders no one ever asked about. Containment only works when the fire stays small. Hargreave hesitated. "They're offering me an exit." Daniel stopped. "What kind? Early retirement, clean statement, no blame?" Daniel closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, his voice was steady. "And you called me because I haven't answered yet." Silence stretched between them. Daniel imagined Hargreave in his office, the weight of a lifetime of compromises pressing down all at once. "If you take it," Daniel said, "they'll say you knew and walked away. If you don't, they'll try to break you." Hargreave let out a breath that sounded like it hurt. "You're not making this easier." "I'm not supposed to." The call ended without a decision. Daniel did not push. Pressure worked best when it felt like gravity, not a shove. That night, he drove instead of ordering a car. He liked the way the city looked from behind the wheel. Honest, unimpressed. At a red light, he watched a group of men argue outside a bar, voices rising, then breaking into laughter just as quickly. Conflict without consequence. The luxury of it. By morning, the luxury was gone. The headline broke before sunrise. Airport security under federal review following passenger complaint. No names, no faces. But the language had teeth. Daniel read it twice, then shut the tablet off. He did not smile. At 9 sharp, his office filled with people who had not been there the day before. Attorneys, compliance officers, a former federal investigator whose handshake lingered a second longer than necessary, measuring something invisible. "Let's be clear," the investigator said, voice low, seasoned. "This is bigger than discrimination." Daniel nodded. "I know. You're alleging systematic misuse of access lanes to bypass customs," the man continued. "That's not administrative failure. That's conspiracy." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "I didn't allege anything. I documented it." The investigator studied him. "You're aware what happens when this goes public?" "Yes," Daniel said. "People will pretend they're shocked." A murmur moved through the room. Someone scribbled notes harder than necessary. Midway through the meeting, Daniel's assistant knocked once and stepped in. Her face was tight. "There's a call you should take." Daniel excused himself and stepped into the hallway. The number was unfamiliar. Mr. Brooks, a voice said, smooth, almost friendly. This is Victor Hale. Daniel's spine straightened. He knew the name. Everyone in logistics did. How can I help you? I think you know, Hale said. You're destabilizing an ecosystem. Daniel looked out over the city, sunlight bouncing off glass and steel. Ecosystems recover when parasites are removed. A chuckle. You're confident. I'm prepared. Hale's tone cooled. You're playing a dangerous game. Daniel's voice did not change. You should stop calling it a game. Silence. Then, quietly, what would it take for you to stand down? Daniel closed his eyes. He thought of the scanner blinking red, of Mark Ellison's jaw tightening, of Laura's hands shaking just enough to notice. It's too late, Daniel said. You already moved. The line went dead. Back in the conference room, the investigator looked up. Who was that? Daniel took his seat. Someone who just realized the walls are thinner than he thought. By afternoon, the second subpoena arrived. Broader, deeper. Names began to surface in whispers. Night manifests, rerouted shipments, accounts that did not match activity. Patterns emerging where coincidence had lived comfortably for years. Laura Perez called near sunset. Her voice was steadier now. They suspended 2 supervisors. That's a start, Daniel said. They're asking questions about the VIP lane. They should. A pause. People are scared. Daniel softened his tone. Fear is not the enemy. Silence is. After the call, Daniel sat alone, lights off, city glowing beyond the window. He felt the weight then, not of victory, of momentum. Things once set in motion did not stop meekly. His phone vibrated again. A text this time. Unknown number. You crossed a line. Daniel typed back with deliberate calm. So did you. The reply came seconds later. This will cost you everything. Daniel stared at the screen, then set the phone face down. He thought of his father again, of the way he used to say that integrity was expensive because it required payment up front. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, a storm building. Predictable, necessary. Daniel stood and walked to the window as the first drops hit the glass, streaking downward, blurring the city into something softer, less certain. Somewhere in that storm, deals were being rewritten. Stories were being reshaped. Men who had never been questioned were starting to rehearse their answers. He knew the next move would not come with a warning. It never did. Daniel Brooks remained still, watching the rain, aware that the system he had challenged was now turning to face him fully. And this time, it would not pretend it was about a boarding pass. The knock on the door came just after midnight, firm but not urgent, the kind meant to sound routine even when nothing about it was. Daniel Brooks was awake. He always was at that hour now. He did not look surprised when he opened the door. 2 men stood in the hallway. Dark suits, no badges visible. One held a folder. The other kept his hands folded in front of him, eyes alert, measuring. Mr. Brooks, the taller one said, we'd like to speak with you. Daniel stepped aside without a word. The men entered, taking in the apartment in quick, practiced glances. No art, no clatter. A life arranged to leave room for thought. They sat at the dining table. The city outside was quiet after the rain, streets reflecting streetlights like thin veins of fire. My name is Andrew Keller, the taller man said. This is my partner, Michael Ross. We're with the Department of Justice. Daniel nodded. I assumed. Keller opened the folder. We're conducting a federal inquiry into port operations, security vendors, and customs bypass schemes tied to multiple major airports. Yes, Daniel said. You are. Ross leaned forward slightly. You are not currently a target. Daniel met his gaze. Yet. Keller allowed himself a thin smile. You've been helpful, but you're also central. That creates complications. Daniel rested his hands on the table. Complications are unavoidable when systems are built to avoid scrutiny. Keller studied him for a moment, then slid a document across the table. We need your cooperation. Formally. Daniel glanced at the paper. Witness agreement. Limited immunity. Conditions dense and precise. He did not touch it. You're offering protection, Daniel said. We're offering structure, Ross replied. Without it, this gets messy fast. Daniel looked from one man to the other. It's already messy. Keller nodded. It's about to get worse. They spoke for nearly an hour, about ports, about lanes that stayed open when they shouldn't, about names Daniel recognized, and a few he didn't, about how corruption rarely announced itself and almost never acted alone. When they finally stood to leave, Keller paused at the door. There's something else, he said. You should increase your personal security. Daniel's expression did not change. Is that a recommendation or a warning? Keller held his gaze. Both. After they left, Daniel locked the door and stood still for a long moment. He felt the quiet settle again, heavier now, the kind that came after something irreversible had been said. By morning, the story broke wide. Cable news ran it on a loop. Federal agents expand probe into airport security contracts. Stock tickers crawled red beneath talking heads who pretended this was sudden. Names were still withheld, but the shape of the thing was clear. This was no longer a single airport. It was a map. Daniel watched for 5 minutes, then turned it off. His phone buzzed constantly. Missed calls, messages, old contacts resurfacing with concern that sounded like calculation. He ignored them all, except one. Thomas Hargreave. They served me, Hargreave said, without preamble. His voice was steady, but thinner. Subpoena. Full deposition. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry. No, Hargreave said. You were right. It needed to be loud. A pause. They're asking about you. Daniel opened his eyes. What did you tell them? The truth, Hargreave said. That you showed me something I should have seen myself. Daniel nodded slowly. That's enough. It won't be, Hargreave replied. They want blood. They always do, Daniel said. Just make sure it's not yours. Later that afternoon, Daniel drove to a warehouse on the south side of the city. The kind of place that didn't draw attention because attention avoided it. Inside, rows of servers hummed, lights blinking in disciplined patterns. A young woman met him near the entrance, tablet in hand, eyes sharp. They're trying to wipe logs, she said. Not clean, sloppy, panic sloppy. Daniel followed her down a narrow aisle. How much did they miss? She smiled without humor. Enough. She pulled data onto a screen. Night entries, rewritten timestamps, cargo weights adjusted by margins small enough to seem accidental. Daniel watched in silence, the pattern clarifying with each line. This is the spine, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. And once it's public, it breaks. His phone vibrated again. This time, the number was blocked. Daniel Brooks, he answered. You've made your point, a voice said. Older, controlled. Familiar from boardrooms and closed-door meetings. This has gone far enough. Daniel leaned against a metal table, the cold seeping through his jacket. Far enough for whom? For everyone, the voice said. There are consequences to tearing down systems. Daniel's jaw tightened. Systems that survive only by hiding deserve to fall. A sigh. You're not thinking long-term. Daniel's voice dropped. I am. That's the problem. Silence stretched. Then, quietly, you won't like what comes next. Daniel ended the call without replying. That evening, the first arrest was announced. Not Ellison, not yet. A mid-level manager, a name few recognized. The kind of offering meant to slow the crowd. It didn't. By nightfall, protesters gathered outside a regional port office, signs raised, voices loud but disciplined. Daniel watched from a distance, unseen. He did not join them. This was not his role. Back at home, he poured himself a glass of water and sat in the dark. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a steady, grinding awareness. It crossed from exposure into conflict. His phone buzzed once more. A text from Laura Perez. They asked me to testify. Daniel stared at the screen, then typed back. Tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then a reply. I'm scared. Daniel's fingers hovered, then moved. So was I. The first time. He set the phone down and leaned back, eyes closed, breathing slow. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of how much of it was about to change. Somewhere, deals were collapsing, alliances cracking. People who had lived comfortably behind procedure were learning what it felt like when the rules stopped protecting them. Daniel Brooks opened his eyes. The system had turned to face him, and now it had begun to blink. The morning the warrants dropped, the city felt different. Not louder, quieter, as if everyone sensed something heavy had shifted underground and was waiting to see which buildings would crack first. Daniel Brooks watched the news from his office without sound. The images told enough. Black SUVs outside glass towers, federal jackets moving through lobbies that had once swallowed dissent. Men in tailored suits, walking with their heads slightly lowered, hands visible, dignity leaking out with every step. This was the phase no one glamorized. No speeches, no applause, just consequence. His phone rang once, then again. He let it ring. Power, he had learned, revealed itself most clearly in what you refused to answer. At 9:30, the call came from a number he did recognize. Daniel, Senator Elaine Porter said. Her voice was measured, but the polish had dulled. We need to talk. We already did, Daniel replied. Yes, she said, and now the cost is clear. Daniel stood and walked to the window. Below, traffic crawled, obedient, unaware. It was always clear, just not to everyone. They're calling this a coordinated takedown, Porter said. They're using your name. Daniel's mouth tightened. They can borrow it. They don't own it. A pause. You're losing allies. I was never collecting them. Porter sighed. There are hearings scheduled, public ones. They want you in the room. Daniel turned back toward his desk. Then I'll be there. Some of them won't be kind, she warned. Daniel's voice stayed level. Neither was the system they protected. The line went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. You could still step back. Let this run without you. Daniel shook his head, though she couldn't see it. This only runs because I didn't. After the call, Daniel sat down and opened the drawer he rarely used. Inside were notebooks, handwritten, dates spelled out, names never shortened. He took one out and placed it on the desk. By noon, the fallout reached the private sector. 2 logistics firms suspended operations. A shipping insurer froze coverage pending review. Markets reacted not with panic, but with something colder. Recalculation. Daniel's assistant entered without knocking. Her face was pale. They arrested Raymond Klein. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. The name settled like dust. Where? At his home. Early morning. Fraud. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Daniel nodded once. He did not celebrate. Klein had been a symptom, not the disease. They're also naming Victor Hale, she added. Unsealed indictment. Daniel felt the weight then. Not satisfaction. Gravity. Lives were tipping now. Families waking up to headlines they never thought would include them. His phone buzzed. A message from Thomas Hargreave. I testified. They asked everything. I told them where to look next. Daniel typed back only 2 words. Thank you. An hour later, Laura Perez stood in his doorway. She looked different, straighter, worn in a new way. They put me on the stand this morning, she said. Daniel gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. She did. Her hands trembled, then steadied. They tried to break me, asked if I was confused, emotional, overreacting. Daniel leaned forward. And I wasn't, she said. I told them exactly what I saw, exactly what I did, exactly what I didn't do. Daniel nodded. That's all truth ever needs. She swallowed. They asked about you. Daniel did not react. I told them you never asked me to do anything, she continued. That you didn't pressure me. That you just stood there and let the system show itself. A faint smile touched Daniel's mouth. That was important. She looked at him, eyes searching. Why didn't you stop it sooner? Daniel answered without hesitation. Because stopping it quietly would have let it start again. She sat with that. Then she stood. They're going to come for you harder now. I know, Daniel said. That afternoon, the first hearing was announced. Live coverage, prime time. The phrase systemic failure began to appear in headlines with disturbing frequency. Daniel did not watch the build-up. He drove instead, took back roads, past neighborhoods where the fight felt distant, abstract. Kids playing in cracked driveways, old men arguing over chessboards in the park. Lives shaped by systems they would never see dismantled on television. When he returned home, the knock came again, earlier this time. This time it was not the Justice Department. 3 men stood outside, one in a suit too expensive to be government, one with the posture of private security, one who said nothing at all. We're here on behalf of interested parties, the first man said. Daniel did not invite them in. You should leave. The man smiled tightly. You're making enemies. Daniel's gaze hardened. No, I'm revealing them. You think this ends with indictments? The man said. It doesn't. Daniel stepped closer, close enough that the man's smile faltered. Everything ends. What matters is who stands when it does. Silence stretched. The man nodded once, a gesture that meant threat, not agreement. They left. That night, Daniel sat alone, lights off, city breathing around him. He felt the cost now, the real one. Isolation. Not loneliness, isolation. The narrowing of space where compromise used to live. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. You could have been one of us. Daniel stared at it for a long moment. Then he deleted it without reply. The next morning he walked into the federal building without escort. Cameras flashed, questions flew. He did not slow, did not raise his hands, did not smile. Inside, the room was bright, unforgiving. Senators lined the dais, cameras everywhere. The audience packed with staffers, journalists, families of men already fallen. Daniel took his seat, adjusted the microphone. When he spoke, it was not loud. This was never about access, he said. It was about who the system assumes belongs and who it expects to endure. The room stilled. I was delayed at an airport, he continued. That happens every day. What followed does not. He spoke for 40 minutes. No notes, no theatrics. Just names, dates, decisions. Silence broken by fact. When he finished, no one applauded. They didn't need to. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the steps. Daniel stood there for a moment, breathing in the evening air. He felt older, lighter, both. This was no longer a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And the system, stripped of its excuses, had nowhere left to hide. The city exhaled after the hearing, but the relief was thin, like a fever breaking without curing the disease. Daniel Brooks felt it as he stepped out into the late afternoon, the press held back by metal barricades, microphones stretched forward like grasping hands. He did not stop. He never did. Words were only useful when they could still change something. Everything else was noise. Inside a black sedan waiting at the curb, the door closed with a muted thud. The city blurred past the tinted windows. Daniel loosened his tie for the first time that day. His reflection stared back at him, eyes steady, mouth set. A man who had crossed a line and knew there was no returning to the version of himself who once moved quietly through systems. His phone vibrated. Not a call, a secure message. 3 words. They are meeting. No name, none needed. Daniel typed back slowly. Where? The reply came almost instantly. Union Station, old conference wing. Daniel leaned back. Union Station was neutral ground, public, symbolic, the kind of place people chose when they wanted legitimacy without witnesses, when they still believed in negotiation. He closed his eyes briefly, not in hesitation, but in preparation. The conference room smelled faintly of polish and old paper. Tall ceilings, heavy oak tables scarred by decades of elbows and whispered deals. The kind of room that had watched history pretend to be orderly. 4 men were already seated when Daniel entered. All older, all white. All men who had survived by never being the first to speak or the last to leave. One of them stood halfway, then thought better of it. Mr. Brooks. Daniel nodded once and took the empty chair at the head of the table without asking. It was not arrogance. It was alignment. You've created instability, the man on the far right said. His voice carried the practiced calm of someone used to being obeyed. Ports are stalling. Insurers are pulling back. You're hurting people who had nothing to do with this. Daniel rested his hands flat on the table. You're confusing inconvenience with injustice. Another man leaned forward, fingers laced. You think this makes you clean? Daniel's gaze flicked to him, sharp. I think it makes the system visible. A low murmur followed. Not agreement, calculation. We can contain this, the first man said. You've made your point. Let us finish it. Daniel shook his head once. Small, final. You've been finishing it for decades. Silence stretched. One of the men cleared his throat. You're not untouchable. Daniel leaned back slightly. Neither are you. That's the difference now. The man nearest him smiled thinly. What do you want? Daniel studied their faces, the lines of age, the confidence eroded just enough to show fear beneath. Independent oversight, federal, permanent, not a committee you appoint, not a report you bury. That's unrealistic, someone snapped. Daniel's voice dropped. So was stopping me at a gate. The room stilled. You're asking us to dismantle structures, the first man said. No, Daniel replied. I'm asking you to stop hiding behind them. They talked for nearly an hour. Offers surfaced and died. Compromises floated and sank. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He let the facts sit between them, like a weight no one could lift without acknowledging it. In the end, one man stood abruptly. You're burning bridges. Daniel stood with him, taller, steadier. Bridges built on silence deserve to burn. They left without shaking hands. Outside, the night air felt heavier. Daniel walked alone down the wide marble steps. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Laura Perez. They reassigned 3 directors, she said. Her voice carried disbelief and something close to pride. Internal audit just went external. Daniel allowed himself a slow exhale. Good. They're scared, she added. They should be, Daniel said. Fear is appropriate. Later that night, he sat in his apartment with the lights off, the city glowing around him like a circuit board. He replayed the day, not with triumph, but with scrutiny. Every word, every pause. This was not a battle, it was a campaign, and campaigns wore men down. His phone rang. Thomas Hargreave again. I resigned, Hargreave said. Daniel closed his eyes. I'm sorry. I'm not, Hargreave replied. It was overdue. A pause. They'll try to blame you. They already are, Daniel said. Good luck, Hargreave said softly. You'll need it. When the call ended, Daniel sat very still. The weight pressed in now. The loneliness of being right when it cost too much. He thought of his father again, of the nights he'd come home quiet, tired, having pushed against things Daniel would only understand years later. The knock came again. Not hard, not late enough to be threatening. Daniel opened the door. A woman stood there, mid-40s, plain coat, no jewelry. Eyes sharp but not hostile. Mr. Brooks, she said. My name is Claire Whitfield, Inspector General's office. Daniel stepped aside. Come in. She did not sit. I won't take much of your time. Then say what matters, Daniel replied. She nodded. We're opening a parallel investigation. Not just ports, not just airports. Infrastructure contracts, nationwide. Daniel felt the shift then, the widening. That will make enemies. She met his gaze. We already have them. A beat. We need someone who understands how these systems hide. Daniel considered her. The exhaustion beneath her professionalism. The resolve. You're asking me to advise. I'm asking you to stay visible, she corrected. They can't touch you while everyone's watching. Daniel exhaled slowly. Visibility cuts both ways. Yes, she said. That's the point. After she left, Daniel stood alone in the doorway, the hall silent. He closed the door and leaned against it for just a moment. One breath, then another. The next morning, the markets opened shaky but steady. New headlines replaced old ones. Attention moved, as it always did. But beneath the surface, something had cracked and could not be repaired quietly. Daniel put on his jacket and stepped out into the day. The city did not bow. It never did. But somewhere deep in its machinery, gears were grinding differently now. He walked forward, not because he wanted to lead, but because stopping was no longer an option. The system had looked at him and blinked. And Daniel Brooks did not look away. The backlash came dressed as concern. It arrived in op-eds and panel discussions, in careful language about stability and unintended consequences. Daniel Brooks watched it unfold, the way a seasoned sailor watched a change in wind. Not alarmed, but alert. The tone was softer now. No more outright denial, just questions. Was this too much, too fast, too disruptive? That was how resistance aged when it realized shouting no longer worked. Daniel sat in a quiet studio downtown, waiting for a red light to turn on. The interview was scheduled live, national. The producer had assured him it would be fair. He had smiled at that. Fairness was never guaranteed, only preparation. A makeup artist dabbed at his forehead, apologizing too much. Daniel waved her off gently. "It's fine," he said. "I've worn worse under brighter lights." She laughed, relieved, and stepped back. Around them, cables snaked across the floor like patient animals. Staffers whispered. Phones buzzed. Outside the glass, the city moved on. The host leaned in before they went live. "They'll say you're overreaching," she warned softly. "That you're punishing institutions for the actions of a few." Daniel nodded. "They always do." The red light came on. "Mr. Brooks," the host began, voice smooth, practiced. "Some are calling you a whistleblower. Others say you're destabilizing critical infrastructure. How do you see yourself?" Daniel did not rush. He looked directly into the camera, not at the host. "I see myself as someone who was told no without a reason," he said, and decided to ask why. The host shifted slightly. "But airports are under strain. Workers are anxious. Do you worry about the ripple effects?" Daniel's eyes softened, but his voice did not. "I worry about the effects of pretending nothing is wrong. That costs workers too. It just hides the bill." A graphic flashed behind them. Systemic oversight or corporate vendetta? Daniel saw it in his peripheral vision, did not flinch. "You've been accused of using your influence to force outcomes," the host continued. Daniel nodded once. "Influence is not the problem. Unchecked influence is. I didn't create power. I refused to ignore it." The segment ended without applause. It didn't need it. Outside, as Daniel exited the building, a small group waited behind a barrier. Not protesters, not supporters, just people. A woman in a security uniform, an older man with a cane, a young father holding a child on his hip. The woman spoke first. "Thank you," she said simply. "They used to tell us not to ask questions." Daniel met her eyes. "Keep asking." The father shifted his child. "My brother worked nights at the port," he said. "They fired him when he complained." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," the man said. "Just don't stop." Daniel nodded. He did not promise. Promises were cheap. Action wasn't. That night, the call came from an unexpected place. "Daniel," a voice said, familiar but unwelcome. "Victor Hale." The man everyone pretended not to answer. Daniel did not hang up. "You're late." A brittle laugh. "You're enjoying this." "No," Daniel said. "I'm enduring it." Hale's voice lowered. "You've cost me 30 years. Daniel leaned against the kitchen counter, city lights reflecting off the glass. "You cost yourself that." "They'll make you a symbol," Hale said, "and then they'll discard you." Daniel's voice was steady. "Symbols last longer than deals." Silence. Then, almost quietly, "What do you want?" Daniel closed his eyes. He was tired now. Not of fighting, of explaining. "I want the next man who gets stopped to know why," he said, "and to know it won't end with him." Hale exhaled. "You think this is moral?" Daniel opened his eyes. "I think it's necessary." The line went dead. Days passed. Hearings multiplied. Audits expanded. The phrase structural reform began appearing in drafts that had once avoided it. It was slow, painfully so. But it was movement. Daniel's world narrowed and widened at the same time. Fewer dinners, fewer calls returned, more documents, more quiet conversations in rooms without windows. One evening, he sat with Laura Perez at a small diner near the courthouse. Nothing fancy, coffee refilled without asking, the kind of place that had survived by not changing. "They offered me a settlement," she said, stirring her cup. Daniel looked up. "What kind?" "Good money, clean record, quiet exit, and," she met his gaze, "I said no." Daniel nodded. "That was yours to decide." She smiled faintly. "You know what scares me?" "What?" "That when this is over, they'll act like it never happened." Daniel leaned back, considering. History always tries to do that. It's why people write it down. She studied him. "You're not writing a book." "No," Daniel said. "I'm leaving records." Outside, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steadier. The streetlights blurred. For a moment, the world felt smaller, manageable. Later that night, alone again, Daniel opened one of his notebooks. He wrote carefully, his handwriting neat, deliberate. Not feelings, facts, dates, names, decisions. This was how change survived, not through outrage, but through memory. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire Whitfield. "They're expanding the mandate, national scope." Daniel closed the notebook, typed back. "Then it's no longer about me." The reply came seconds later. "It never was." Daniel set the phone down and stared out into the dark. He felt the weight then, fully. Not fear, responsibility. The kind that did not fade when the cameras turned away. He thought again of that moment at the gate, the red light, the quiet certainty in the officer's voice. "You can't board." That sentence had opened a door no one intended. Now, on the other side of it, Daniel Brooks understood something most systems forgot. Progress did not arrive with permission. It arrived when someone refused to accept a small wrong as the price of order. Tomorrow would bring more resistance, more compromise disguised as reason, more voices asking him to soften, to wait, to consider the optics. Daniel turned off the light and lay down, eyes open, breathing steady. He had waited long enough, and whatever came next, he would meet it the same way he met that red light, standing still, refusing to step aside. The final ruling came on a Tuesday, the kind of ordinary day history preferred when it wanted to hide in plain sight. Daniel Brooks stood alone in his office as the decision loaded on his screen, the cursor blinking once before the words settled into place like a verdict carved in stone. Federal oversight mandated. Permanent independent review. Vendor contracts suspended pending requalification. Criminal referrals forwarded. No grand language, no celebration. Just structure. Just consequence. He closed the laptop gently, as if loud motions might disturb what had taken so long to assemble. Outside, the city moved as it always did. Buses groaned, horns flared and faded. People argued over coffee and deadlines, unaware that something foundational had shifted beneath their feet. That was how real change happened. Quietly, without permission. Daniel poured himself a glass of water and sat down. The exhaustion finally arrived. Not crashing, not dramatic, just heavy enough to make his shoulders sag. For the first time in weeks, there was nothing left to answer. No calls waiting, no meetings scheduled. The silence felt earned. His phone buzzed once, a message from Claire Whitfield. "It's official. We did it the hard way." Daniel typed back slowly. "The only way that lasts." Later that afternoon, He walked through the terminal where it had started. Not the same gate, not the same flight, but the same polished floors, the same echo of footsteps, the same hum of controlled movement. No one recognized him. That was fine. Recognition had never been the point. At the security checkpoint, a young officer glanced at his boarding pass, then at him, then smiled politely. "You're good to go, sir." The scanner glowed green. Daniel nodded and moved on, the moment passing without friction, without wait. That, too, mattered. At the window overlooking the runway, he paused. Planes lined up, nose to tail, patient and orderly. Systems worked best when they served everyone the same way. He thought of Laura Perez, now leading a compliance task force with hands that no longer shook. Of Thomas Hargreave, retired but restored in a way titles never managed. Of men like Victor Hale and Raymond Klein, now footnotes in cases that would be studied quietly by people who understood what patterns meant. Daniel boarded his flight and took his seat. Not first class, not economy, just a seat. He buckled in and looked out at the tarmac as the aircraft began to move. The engines roared softly, a controlled power that respected limits. He closed his eyes as the plane lifted, the ground falling away in a smooth, practiced arc. Hours later, back home, Daniel unlocked his front door and stepped into the familiar quiet. He set his keys down, loosened his jacket, and stood still for a moment, listening. No sirens, no rain, just the low sound of the city breathing. On the kitchen table lay one last envelope. Plain, no return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a man Daniel did not know. It read simply, "I saw what you did. It mattered." Daniel folded the paper carefully and placed it in a drawer with the notebooks. Memory belonged where it could be found. That evening, the news ran a brief segment. No footage of Daniel, no dramatic music, just a headline scrolling by. Oversight expanded following federal review. The anchor moved on to weather. The world adjusted. Daniel turned the television off and sat in the dark. He did not feel victorious. He felt finished, in the best way. Tomorrow, others would pick up the work. Lawyers, auditors, inspectors, people who believed in systems, because they believed systems could be better. Daniel's role was done. He had stood still when he was told to move. That was enough. He lay down and closed his eyes, the city's distant glow painting the ceiling with faint light. Somewhere, another man would be told no for no good reason. Somewhere else, someone would remember what happened when that word was challenged. That was how momentum survived, not as legend, but as example. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to support it. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts below with 3 simple words. Keep standing still.